What's going on, everybody? Kalip's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be comparing the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G to the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. Now, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing and availability. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a 6.7-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED Plus display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 392, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.8-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 395, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. So both of these phones have great displays, and they each have their own advantages. On one hand, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, the display technology is a little bit better. With the Super AMOLED Plus display, the colors are going to be a little bit brighter and more vibrant, and as far as the brightness and viewing angles, they're going to be a lot better on the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, this phone is going to be a lot easier to see than the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now, on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone is a little bit larger, not really by a whole lot, but it's definitely slightly noticeable at least. And not only this, but also with an aspect ratio of 20.5:9 versus 20:9, the Moto G Stylus 5G is going to get a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like streaming videos in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And when you're scrolling, maybe you're reading an article or browsing social media, with the taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, as far as the displays go, both phones do have their own advantages, but for the most part, both of them are really good. For storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 256GB with microSD card expansion as well. Now, I'm not sure what the carriers are doing, but this phone in my hand is factory unlocked, and that is the storage on this phone, but keep in mind, if you get this phone through a carrier, it might be slightly different. But that being said, in this case, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have an advantage, having double the storage of the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G. But that being said, 128GB really isn't bad either, and for the average user, it should be perfectly fine. But of course, if you're a power user, if you have a lot of apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, the Moto G Stylus 5G will have an advantage. And keep in mind as well, both phones do have microSD card expansion, and that's great for offloading stuff like photos and videos, for example. For security features, both phones have fingerprint scanners. With the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, it's right here in the display. Looks real nice and premium, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, it's right here on the power key. And keep in mind, in addition to this, both phones also have face unlock. But starting with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go. Moving on to the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners are real fast and responsive, no issues whatsoever. And again, remember, both phones also have face unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now, taking a look at the camera setups here, these phones have pretty much the exact same design for the front-facing camera. With the A73 5G, this camera is 32 megapixels, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we got a quad camera setup with a 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera that also doubles as a macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, these phones have pretty much everything. Macro camera, ultra wide camera, really high quality regular camera, they got it all. So if you're taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, you're not going to go wrong with either phone. Now that being said, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does take significantly higher quality photos, and in addition to this, for video, this phone can record in 4K in both the rear and front cameras, whereas unfortunately with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we are limited to 1080p. So overall, for taking photos, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone because they are both great. But again, if you want the best between the two, and you're recording a lot of videos as well, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting 8GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 778G 5G processor. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting 8GB GB of RAM as well, with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor. Now, I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, we're getting a single core score of 773 and a multi-core score of 2888. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a single core score of 622 and a multi-core score of 1928. So clearly, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have an advantage here, and if you're doing higher performance activities like maybe playing Call of Duty, you're definitely going to get a better experience with this phone. But on the other hand, the Moto G Stylus 5G, while not being nearly as fast as the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G, is still not a slow phone by any means, and for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, and even some mobile gaming, this phone really is not going to be bad. Now, that being said, what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of which phone will be a better upgrade for you. You might find that although obviously the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G is the faster of the two, the Moto G Stylus 5G might be a perfectly fine upgrade for you already. Now, these phones both have 5000 mAh batteries, so they're both going to get great battery life per charge as well as great longevity down the road. The only difference here is that the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G supports 25W fast charging and the Moto G Stylus 5G supports 15W fast charging. So honestly, not really a huge difference, probably not for most people, but if you do have a really strong fast charger and you want to make the most of it, then I would say the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G will have an advantage. But again, in general, I feel like fast charging isn't a huge issue, and in my experience, both phones do charge up pretty fast. As far as other features go, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, that will not be an issue with either phone. Another thing to keep in mind is that with the Moto G Stylus 5G, as the name suggests, this phone does have a stylus, whereas obviously the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does not. So if you do want a phone with a stylus, but you don't want to pay $1,400 for a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, the Moto G Stylus 5G will be a perfectly good choice. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, between the two, if you want the best features and performance, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G by a slight margin is the better device. With this phone, we got better display technology, and this is really going to make it a lot easier to see the phone outside in the sun because the viewing angles, again, are a lot better. This phone also takes better photos and can record videos in 4K. It has a much more powerful processor, and it has better fast charging if you're into that. But on the other hand, with the Moto G Stylus 5G, this phone does have some advantages. First of all, it has a taller and more narrow form factor and a slightly larger display in general. It also has double the storage, although keep in mind, the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G does have a 256GB variant as well if you really want it. And the Moto G Stylus 5G also does have a stylus. And keep in mind, in general, this phone still does take great photos, and the performance is really good too. So if you want something solid that works, and maybe is a little bit more affordable depending on where you're getting it, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will still be a perfectly fine choice. Now again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as information about pricing and availability because this is always changing. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A73 5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2022. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.